One who watches this later. Um, for the people that are watching this on recording, I apologize. I made a couple announcements about checking posts. Just make sure that you look at that, especially on the getting signed up with your technology and making sure it works. We're going to be starting with imperialism here, and I'm going to go with that right now. So like I was saying before, I forgot to hit the record button there. Old imperialism, new imperialism, I think would be a really good DBQ topic, really good to compare the two. So I think imperialism is important, something to look at as far as the test goes. Now, when we're looking at new imperialism, we have a couple things that we need to focus on. Number one, industrialization. Europeans need oil, rubber, natural resources to fuel their economies, to fuel their industry, and imperialism is going to be a big aspect, in trying to get that done. Another big thing that we have is a competition between European countries on who's going to be the best. And the more colonies you have, the stronger and more powerful you are. So, much like we saw with, early imperialism or old imperialism, we have countries competing for colonies in the Americas and India, and trying to get a favorable balance of trade there. And we're certainly seeing that with new imperialism too. Africa is more of a hotbed of activity than we saw in the first imperialistic period. That was more the Americas, but the ideas are the same there. And if I was to make another comparison, I would probably compare the ideas of racism in both new and old imperialism. And that in old imperialism, oh, we got to help these poor, native savages convert to Christianity, and these poor people, someone's got to help them out. It's our cross to bear. And then in the new imperialism, we have a very similar mentality. We've got, we don't want to go into Africa, but someone's going to civilize these people, the whole white man's burden, that we don't want to do it, but it's our Christian, duty to go in and help these people out. So those are some of the motivations for imperialism. If you go a little bit further down the sheet there, our big heavy hitter in imperialism is going to be England. They're gonna dominate imperialism, and I would compare them to like early Spain in the early exploration period. England is the key country when it comes to imperialism. Now, if you flip over that note sheet, we'll go on to the back there, and if you go down to where it says David Livingstone and H.M. Stanley, just know that these two guys get imperialism started in Africa. Livingstone, in a very pure way, he's a Christian missionary. He's going into the Congo to help some people out, and his communications stop, and he creates a lot of intrigue. Stanley, in a much less pure way, Stanley's an adventurer, racist, big game hunter, and he goes in there, to prop up his own reputation and kind of maybe upsells the severity of maybe some of the what Europeans would consider to be uncivilized practices in Africa. So he's sensationalizing the whole situation. And they draw a lot of attention to imperialism in Africa. Now, I think that a lot of European countries want to go into Africa and later India and certainly China in an effort to fuel their industries and put money in their pockets, but that don't sound good. That doesn't sound like something that you can sell to your faith. It doesn't sound like something you can sell to your constituents. The voting populace doesn't like the sound of that. So what they're going to do is they're going to play this, social Darwinistic card where these people are biologically inferior to us. So it's our duty as Europeans to go in there and, help these people out, teach them how to be sanitized, teach them how to, live in a capitalistic world, this is sometimes described as white man's burden, that we don't want to have to do it as the Europeans thought, but it's our burden, it's our cross to bear. So there's not a lot of truth to it. The Europeans might feel that they're more advanced, but the Europeans were basically drinking their own poop water until about 30 years ago. So, I mean, it's not like the Europeans are so far sophisticated that, it's their duty to go and help all these people. But that's certainly what they'll sell it on. And just to draw that connection with social Darwinism, this is the whole idea that Darwin's ideas can be applied to humanity. Hitler will do this too. The Aryan is the superior biological race. All the other races are inferior. It'd be best just to get rid of all these races for the benefit of human beings. I mean, so that's being used here with white man's burden. Now, unfortunately, although a lot of the world will be ravaged by imperialism, Africa will get hit first and hardest. Sometimes called the scramble for Africa, and the reason why is everyone's trying to get into Africa to get these resources, and Africa is so close to Europe, it seems like easy pickings for everyone. So Africa is going to get hit hard. Now, although European countries are going to exploit Africa pretty much across the board, I could bring up examples with France and Spain and England and Germany. I mean, there's tragedy all over the place. Certainly the worst case scenario is going to happen in the Congo under the influence of Belgium and their king named Leopold II. Make sure that he's highlighted in your notes. Leopold II is one of the great monsters of history. He's going to kill 10 billion Africans in a exploitive adventure to get rubber. And it certainly is pointed out as the worst example of European atrocities in Africa. Not to say the Belgians are the only ones that are doing it, like I said before, but this certainly is our worst example in Africa. Because of this kind of mass scramble for Africa, and to a lower degree the atrocities that are happening there, Bismarck is going to call what is known as the Berlin Conference. Make sure that you have that highlighted starred in your notes there. All these conferences are great examples in DBQs. So if you can remember Berlin Conference, that's a great one. Also, Berlin Congress and conference can be tough. If you just remember conference, F for Africa, all right? Congress, no F in it, no Africa in it. So maybe that might help you out. The Berlin Conference is going to be an agreement of European nations on who gets what in Africa, and Bismarck hopes that this will avoid a world war. He sees that coming, and he feels that Africa will be the cause. He may have been right. Like if there is no Berlin Conference, that may have been some kind of a African dispute that exploded into war, and here everyone's going at it now. Maybe it wouldn't have been the Balkans at all. But the conference does settle things down, and it does cut Africa up into pieces. Just know that there's no attention paid for African interests here. Tribes are split up. Enemies are put into the same country, and this is one of the reasons that Africa is in such turmoil today. Is borders that had existed in the past are not paid attention to at all by Europe. So that's the Berlin Conference. I'm not going to do anything with the Boer War because it really only has to do with the effect on World War I. If you're looking at that sheet where it says Cecil Rhodes, Cecil Rhodes had become Prime Minister of the Cape Colony in South Africa. And he was advocating that, England basically run the table on Africa altogether. So there's a famous picture of him where he's got his hands out like this, and he's got one foot on South Africa where he's the prime minister of. The other foot is on Egypt, which England's controlled forever. I mean, we talked about Napoleon in Egypt and all that kind of stuff. And this just shows like this imperialistic idea that like Africa is English. So you never know. That cartoon is pretty famous. It could show up, but I just want you to know who Cecil Rhodes is and what that cartoon means if it does. I'm pretty much done with Africa. If you move over real quickly to spheres of influence, that'll do China. In Asia, certainly our most important situation with imperialism will be China. Spheres of influence, China is going to be cut up into basically little pieces where European countries are going to control different areas. And in these areas, they will sell opium, which is going to be the great tragedy of Chinese imperialism. The English pioneer this, but the European countries will jump on it pretty quick. Opium's being sold in China to a ridiculous degree. We think maybe 1/3 of the Chinese population will be addicted to opium. There's going to be a war fought over this called the Opium War, where China tries to get England and European influence out. They fail, and China is essentially destroyed during European imperialism. They won't recover until after World War II. So just know opium war, spheres of influence with China. I think you'll be good there. And let's see here. Let's just move over to late reform England and France. And I want to talk about Disraeli and Gladstone. And these are two English prime ministers during imperialism and also during the reign of Queen Victoria, who's kind of running this whole situation of imperialism. Now, when we look at Disraeli and Gladstone, very different people. Disraeli is a Jewish homosexual and a conservative, loved by the Queen. Gladstone is a fundamental Protestant liberal who's hated by the Queen. So they're very different sides of the coin here. Now, Disraeli is going to get the Great Reform Bill of 1867 passed, and just make sure you highlight that. It's 2 down under Disraeli. And what this is going to do is it's going to redesign boroughs to stop voting fraud, and it's also going to expand voting rights to lower middle class men in England. And keep in mind, anytime you see an expansion of voting rights, both conservatives and liberals are scrambling for that, because the more voters you add, the more voters you have. So, Disraeli and Gladstone both wanted to pass this, but it's Disraeli that gets it done. So that's an important thing with the Great Reform Act of 1867. Also know the Artisan Dwelling Act. I put that in bold there for you. This had to do with the absolutely disgusting slum houses in the cities. The government had been trying to get these slumlords to clean up these houses for some time. First off, for the poor. Secondly, for everyone else. The cholera spreads to rich, poor, middle class, everybody. So you have some areas of real filth that spreads to everyone. So, the Artisan Dwelling Act was the idea of the government will provide clean and quality housing if these tenant owners can't pull it off. And also, the government can seize these disgusting dwellings if necessary and if a public health concern is warranted. So basically, the Artisan Dwelling Act is putting landlords on notice, like, clean it up, or you're going to lose what you have. And a lot of these landlords clean it up. I think that the English government ends up building like 2 of these subdivisions in all, so where people live, not many. But it's mainly a scare tactic to try to clean up, and it works pretty effectively. So that's the Artisan Dwelling Act. If you flip that over, we'll go to Gladstone. Know that William Gladstone is going to be a liberal. He is going to pass the Secret Ballot Act. This was a huge problem in England. A lot of the voting registration was done in the factory, so the factory owner could monitor who you voted for. This caused colossal corruption in elections, and the secret ballot's going to be put in. No one knows who you vote for, so the factory owner cannot manipulate elections like they had been in the past. Also, we have the Reform Act of 1884. Make sure you highlight that. This is going to grant almost universal suffrage in England. There are some groups that are still left out: criminals, absolutely destitute, poor. But by this time, by 1884, almost all men can vote in England. So, once again, the liberals trying to expand voting, to get more support in the next elections. The last thing that I wanted to mention about Gladstone is his support of an independent Ireland. Gladstone feels Ireland's just a ball of chain on England, and the quicker they can get rid of it, the better. He basically stakes his career on an independent Ireland. His party does not agree with him, and Ireland will not be granted their freedom during this time period. And Gladstone's pretty much destroyed over the issue of Irish home rule. So just know that he's a big Irish guy, or that might be misleading. I'm not saying he's a fan of the Irish, but he's a fan of getting rid of the Irish, Irish independence. So that's Gladstone. If you move down, you'll see the French French Republic and French Reform there. And we're going to begin with after the Franco-Prussian War. So Bismarck comes in, slams down France, Paris falls, Napoleon III, see ya. And then we get the Paris Commune. The Paris Commune is the idea of a bunch of socialists that, because France is so messed up and things are so, I guess just confusing since the fall of Napoleon, that the best thing for Paris to do is to break away from France and become an independent socialist country. It's absolutely ridiculous. The fact that people thought that could actually happen is absurd, but they're going to try to do it. The French army is going to come in. They're going to absolutely smash this Paris Commune. And this is taken as the first time communism tries to, represent itself, and the evil capitalists come in and smash it down. Now, that's not true. In fact, these Paris Commune people were not communists at all. They're socialists, and we've talked about this before. You can be socialist and not be a communist. But, in this situation, they're not communists. The communists try to take credit for it, but, they're going to choose to take this over is a guy named Adolphe Thiers. And Adolphe Thiers is put in a really tough spot, boy. Adolphe Thiers is, representative for the French Republic in a situation where he's got to negotiate the end of the Franco-Prussian War, and he doesn't really have a leg to stand on. So he's a pretty unpopular figure when he comes in. He will help set up what is going to be known as the Third French Republic, which is one of the most hated governments in French history. This is the government that actually goes down to the Nazis. So, this is not a very popular government. There's a whole bunch of reasons that they're not popular, but one of the most important reasons is what's called the Dreyfus Affair. And the Dreyfus Affair basically has to do with the fact that the Germans have got a spy in the French military after the war. And because of this, they're stealing secrets from the French military. The French people find out about it. They're super upset about it. They need someone to blame for it. The government dumps it on this guy, Dreyfus, because he's Jewish. They totally frame him, send him to Devil's Island to prison. What happens is a Jewish writer named Emile Zola is going to write a book called I Accuse, where basically he is going to totally expose this whole scam that the government has set up here and get Dreyfus off the hook. Now, this has two, impacts. Number one, the French people are like, what? You totally framed this dude and sent him to Devil's Island to die, and all because he was Jewish. From this point on, the French people will not have any faith in their government. And, it's almost like how long it took us to get back from Watergate and what Nixon did. It's probably worse than Watergate. So that's kind of a comparison for you. Now, the other issue here is Jews are kind of like, man, this is just same old, same old. People just pinning everything to us. And this is going to, really start to surge forward an idea called Zionism, which is the idea that the Jewish need their own state, their own homeland, where they can be free from this type of persecution. So just keep that in mind. That's the Dreyfus Affair. Another scandal with the French government is the Bollinger Affair, where we have a socialist attempted takeover of government. So that's another scandal that you can look at there for the French government. Now, to end off here today, we're going to do a little bit of art, and we will call it a day. First off, I just want to throw out there the idea of realism. All right. Realism is an artistic movement that really rejects romanticism, and romanticism is like Napoleon's time. So, that's like David and Napoleon on horseback, where he looks like he's 7'2", and realism is like enough with the flowery, romantic images of life. Let's get down and dirty and see what's going on here. Now, on a literary end, Emile Zola. Okay, he's a great example of realism. Dickens is another good example of realism. George Bernard Shaw is not on your list, but I'm going to throw him in there. Mrs. Warren's Profession, where he talks about prostitution. Ibsen is down there. They've got, father of modern drama, but he's going to write Dollhouse. I talked about how this woman's being abused, and in the golden cage, and so realists focus on like domestic abuse, alcoholism, the darker side of life, the realities of life. Now, in art, if you flip over there, I just gave you a couple different realistic artists. I'm not going to go through all of them. I just gave them to you just in case for some reason a random realist painting shows up in that DBQ, and maybe one of these guys is the artist, and it gives you some insight. But I'm certainly not going to waste any of your time going through that. Now, after realism, we have impressionism. Impressionism is a very different form of art. It's creating an emotional experience. It's using light and color to do this. I've said this before. If you don't know a lot about art, I threw up something that Michelangelo did, and then we threw up, something that Bernini did from the Baroque period, and then I threw up David from the Romantic period, and then, we threw up one of these realist artists. Like, it'd be hard to tell, the difference between the paintings. I think it's hard. I'm horrible at art. Maybe that's why I think it's hard. But Impressionism, like, you can tell. I mean, I have an Impressionist painting right up there behind me of the Washington Monument, and like you can tell immediately, that's Impressionism. Now, when we're looking at Impressionism, Claude Monet, father of Impressionism, Mr. Lilypad. Besides that one rando painting that I show you of his wife and his daughter, it's almost all landscape. So if you see a landscape, it looks like Impressionism, it's Monet. All right, you don't have to worry about that. Now, if you flip over to the next sheet there, the other post-impressionist that I want to throw out there is Van Gogh. If you're not painting in France during this time, and you're not an impressionist, Van Gogh's living at this exact same time, but he's not in France, so he's a post-impressionist. Van Gogh's most famous painting is Starry Night. I think almost all of you know Starry Night. So if he shows up there, post-impressionist. Paul Cézanne, another post-impressionist. If you flip over there, we have Pablo Picasso. He is going to be considered the founder of the artistic style of Cubism. Cubism's another one of these ones where, like, you could pretty much know it's Cubism. Boy, it's like these abstract images that, Guernica is his most famous one. I've showed you a couple paintings of Guernica. It's got the bull coming up and the building that's on fire. And this is the Spanish bombing, the Nazi bombing of the Spanish city of Guernica during World War II. So, that's probably his most famous painting. And let's see here. I think that's all I want to do. I'm looking to see if there's anything I missed. I think we've got it all. As I was going through through imperialism, I noticed that I missed Japan as I was moving along. I really don't think they're going to get into it anyways, but if they did, just know that Emperor Meiji is going to modernize Japan to save it from imperialism, but I really don't think that'll come up. So at this point, I'll be happy to answer any questions you have on the test itself, the content that I just went through, DBQs. If you don't have any questions, feel free to go and enjoy your weekend. But don't forget about Monday, please. Great opportunity to go through a DBQ and really kind of iron that out, ask any questions before game day. So I appreciate those of you that showed up. I really do. Have a good weekend, or stick around and ask some questions. All right, if there's no questions, I'm gonna.
Yeah, sorry. I don't know how to manipulate Google Meet.